Well, it's wonderful to be with you today, Andrea. You are the CEO of Pragmatic, the author of a new book called What to Ask, How to Learn What Customers Need But Don't Tell You. Congratulations. I read it.
Thanks.
It is a bold, insightful, funny book that actually isn't shy. It isn't shy about challenging conventional wisdom and reinventing that wisdom. And I loved it. It's practical, full of great examples. So congratulations on the book. You are a global citizen. You've worked in 12 countries, I believe, and you are hailing all the way from Iowa in the US. And today, of course, we are going to delve into customers, of course, who they are, how they think, how they feel, how they behave, and what companies get wrong and how they could get it right. So welcome to the show, Andrea.
Oh, thank you very much.
Great. So let's just start with a very, very easy question, which is, and then the nature of the title of the book, really, which is what stops customers telling us what they really want? It sounds like an easy relationship, easy equation. I'm a customer. I want something from you. I'm going to tell you what you want. What gets in the way?
Oh, I think fundamentally they don't know what they want, right? If someone asked you about, let's say, a brand new innovation, you have no context in regards to whether that's going to be valuable for you. And so we ask customers what they want, but they just really don't have really a sense of what an innovation could be, what something that would be totally different that outside of their realm of experience could exist. And so they just can't give you that real tangible feedback directly, right? They know their problems, they know their experiences, they know what they see, but sometimes they're just too close to it.
But I guess a lot of organizations would say they are customer-centric, that buzzword, that term that I'm sure you and I have heard on many occasions, where they'd say, well, even if they can't tell us, we sort of know them. Is it possible, however, to create a customer-centric organization that can at least anticipate and get a sense of those needs?
Well, of course you can, but that requires a lot of different moving parts working together. So a lot of organizations will say, we are customer-centric, or that's a new strategy. They say, we're going to become customer-centric, and what we're going to do is focus on customer needs. And this is a wonderful, lofty statement, right? It's supposed to rally the troops, if you will. But if that concept isn't baked into the organization and how it operates, how it functions, how it behaves, then that's all it is just this lofty statement. It doesn't really mean anything on a ground level. So if your behaviors aren't really reflecting what you're saying internally, then externally, you're not going to get any closer or more customer-centric than you were before you made the statement.
So if you were an organization that was very product-centric and trying to make the shift to becoming more customer-centric, and there are quite a lot of tech companies, for example, are trying or have tried to make that shift, where would you start in terms of trying to encourage those behaviors you just talked about?
Well, simply put, you need to get exposed to customers. You need to be around customers. You need to talk to them. You need to engage with them. And this is not really a new concept, but something like that needs to be prolific throughout the organization. You think maybe the customer-facing elements of the organization, sales, marketing, customer service, they're doing the customer-centric work, and they'll just gather all that information and bring it back to the mothership, if you will. But if you're not really immersing every single person in the organization with customers, you're going to miss those little nuanced things that are the difference between making small changes that maybe will save you money or save your customers time, and finding out new innovations and prolific problems that have never been addressed. I mean, think about a department like accounting, which never really faces customers, never really talks to customers, but they deal with customers in their own way. And if they have a chance to engage with a customer, talk with a customer, they might see something that sales, marketing, customer service didn't see, because they're coming from a different perspective. And so it's something that has to be baked into the organization and everyday behaviors in truly becoming customer-centric.
And so organizations that have grown up without that philosophy and that culture you just described, I just wonder how possible it is. Do you have to grow up with this, and hence tweak and improve. Or if you had an organization that just had I can think of a few organizations I've worked with where it's all about the product, the heroes are the product.
Sure.
You do a bit of customer research occasionally, you talk about customers, but it's theatre really. The ones I've seen have really struggled in actually making that shift. Is it possible? Does it take a long time, or can you make the shifts relatively quickly?
It's possible, but just like anything else, you have to commit to doing it. So think about a good analogy is you're going to get fit. That's your plan, right? So you get all the equipment, you buy the equipment, you make a schedule, and you start working out every day. But if you don't stick to that schedule, if you don't dedicate that as part of your daily life, as part of your daily routine, you will fall off the proverbial wagon, right? So it's essential to sit down and say, as an organization, we want to become more customer-centric. And it's more important to define what that is for your organization. So specificity is critical, because as we were talking about earlier, you can say you're customer-centric, that's wonderful, but what does that mean to each and every department? What does that mean to marketing, accounting, customer service, finance, legal, even sales? What behaviors encompass that organization's definition of customer centricity? So you have to not only commit yourself to saying this is what we want to do for the long term, but also define what that means for your organization and what behaviors you want to see out of each and every employee to embody that.
I get that. That sounds very, very real, very practical, which is, I'll come back to how you market your own agency, which is refreshingly candid. But what about the success stories that in a way go against that philosophy, or at least publicly? The Apples, the Teslas of the world, you say we don't really do customer research, we don't look at customers. I'm not sure I buy that personally. But where do they fit in your work and your thinking?
It's very easy to compare anything to those Apples and Teslas of the world, because you look at them as the mecca of success. And you say, oh, whatever they're doing, if we replicate that, then we will have the same success. And if everything was that easy, everyone would simply do it. But Apple and Tesla are different in that they were bringing to the table something that never really existed before in the marketplace. I mean, think about the iPhone was a huge, just transformational change in regards to how phones were designed, how they functioned, how they looked, and how they operated. And so if you presented this to a focus group and said, all right, would you want a device that had no buttons that could do X, Y, and Z? It'd be incredibly hard to get your mind around that, right? Customers can't visualize things that have never existed because they have no basis of comparison. So in cases like Apple and Tesla, when you're putting out something that is so new, that is just groundbreaking, customer feedback, customer input on what do you like this, do you like this feature, do you not like this feature, is actually kind of counterproductive, right? Because those customers aren't going to give you very good feedback. Once they've had a chance to use it and experience it, that's a different story. So if you are a chair manufacturer, let's say, something very rudimentary, and you say, well, I don't need customer feedback. Everyone sat in a chair. Everyone understands what a chair does and what its function does. So to not get customer input is cutting your nose off to spite your face, because it's not a revolutionary product.
And I guess that's really clear. I guess the really innovative organizations you mentioned, two stellar examples, they may not engage customers in the process in the way you described, at least in the early stages, but they're still thinking about customer needs that are not met. They'll still be thinking about how to amaze them, how to delight them, but it's how and when you engage them, which I guess is different. One aspect of your book, well, many aspects of your book I really enjoyed, but one aspect in particular, you went through a number of approaches and methods that people use in companies and consultancies to embed customer thinking and mindsets in their work. You looked at NPS, the customer journey map, customer personas, jobs to be done theory, and you had a good go at each of them with good reason in many cases. Which of those are the most flawed?
That's a good question, because if you think about any tool, if you're applying it incorrectly, it's not going to give you the results you want, right? So you could, try to use a spoon to unclog a toilet, and maybe you'll be successful at the end, but it's not going to be as effective as a plunger, right? So, I was very...
What a beautiful example.
I know.
How beautiful.
I was pretty brutal about those different tools, but what I think is the most frustrating is that they are theories, right? They're people that have developed very wonderful concepts, but when it comes to execution, you have to be that person that has gone through the rigors and sits down and goes, okay, I'm going to apply this in a business environment where there's layers of politics, there's territories, there's trying to get people's time and resources, something that moves slow. Leadership is going to push back saying, where is the deliverable? What are we going to see? And you have your P&L that you have to worry about. So the one that drives me the most crazy is actually the Net Promoter Score. And I say this because the other two that I mentioned, they can have applicability, right? You could kind of modify it to make it have some use for your organization. But Net Promoter Scores are really just a self-promotional, I feel good about myself, we are doing good type of number. And the challenge about that number, whatever it may be, is that, first of all, it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell me why, it doesn't tell me what, it doesn't tell me where, which is very important, right? A Net Promoter Score of 8 tells me what? How is that actionable information, right? And maybe that could be different by region. So it might be an 8 on the East Coast, it might be a 3 on the West Coast. So your aggregate number is really just kind of a, self-fulfilling prophecy. And second, the people that rank those as, let's say, a 7 or 8 or even maybe a 9, they're not super delighted. This is not elation level. This is like, you're pretty good, I'm very content, that's all you really know. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to jump ship or change providers or buy a product from someone else that doesn't elate them, that doesn't go heads and tails above and beyond their expectations. And so, your 7, 8, 9, yeah, that's great. Who cares? You can put it in a report. You can tell your board that that's where we're at. You can tell your employees that's where you're at, but it doesn't serve any function.
That's a great debunking of that measure that's used in many, many organizations. But let's flip it from the, if you like, the challenging to the more positive. Of all the organizations you've worked with and researched, which would be the ones or one that you'd pick out where you say, you know what, this organization lives up to the title of your book. They really learn, they really understand what customers need now and tomorrow. Who are they, and what do they really do well?
The one that comes to mind, and there's a big section in the book about this one, is Trader Joe's. And I'm sure you're familiar with Trader Joe's. They're a grocery store chain.
Yes.
Okay.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think everybody knows their $2 Chuck, which is their very inexpensive wine that you can buy. But the one thing about Trader...
Never heard of it.
Oh, well, I'm sure. There's a couple bottles behind you, right? That Trader Joe's, they immerse themselves with customers every day. And all they do is make micro adjustments to everything they're doing every day, all the time, based on customer feedback. And that's why people are so passionate about following Trader Joe's, right? You can go into Trader Joe's, look at a product on the shelf. Someone will come up and, you can ask questions to them. If you've never tried it, they'll open it up and say, hey, let's try it right here, right? They will respond to customer input on a dime. If the store doesn't open early enough for a customer in a certain region, they'll change the store hours, right? They are attentive and responsive to what customer needs, and customers aren't adapting to them, they are adapting to the customer. And so they really embody what you might define as customer centricity. But I'd argue that customer centricity really needs to be defined by each and every company independently.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do Trader Joe's get to the point where customers feel comfortable, willing, able to, if you like, engage in the way you described? It sounds like common sense. It sounds like just human to human interaction, and that's one thing you focus on, which is customers are people. They're not things. They are real people, and you emphasize that a lot in your book. But how do you build that relationship where people, I guess, want to and feel comfortable to engage in such a conversation?
Well, think about it as talking with a stranger, right? You have to start opening that dialogue, right? You have to start making yourself accessible to the customer. So if you think about many companies, and I'm sure you've had an experience somewhere where it was almost impossible to talk to the company, right? You had to go through many phone loops, or you had to call this number or that number, and then you try to get to a person, and then that person moves you off to someone else, or they don't even have a phone number, right? There's some companies, especially tech companies, that just don't. So there's these miles between the company and the customer. And so the customer is never going to approach, just like a stranger. If the stranger is walling you off, putting their back to you, walking away, they're not going to engage with you. But if you approach them, provide them with options, and focus on trying to help them achieve what their goals are right away out of the gate, then you're always going to have a lot more useful dialogue from them.
And that's quite a shift from many organizations that in some ways may have lots of different engagement with customers, but effectively they want to collect the data, whether it's different types of data, different types of insight and information, and effectively sort of mine it, use it, and in a closed way. And then, if you like, push marketing, push product to them in different ways. But I guess there is quite a shift, just to take your point earlier, towards a more openness towards customers in terms of being more transparent with their information, in terms of using it more wisely, sharing more about how they're using it in different forms. How big a shift are you seeing, and what are these companies doing where I guess customers want a more open relationship, but they also want control. They want control over their data and want to see how it's being used?
Yeah. I think companies have the problem of hoarding data. And there's a little segment in the book about this. But we try to capture so much data to actually avoid talking with a customer, talking with a person, dealing with a human. Right? We can just use the data. The data will be the surrogate. And there's comfort in that because it feels exact, right? 20 people said they liked this, 10 people said they didn't. And so that is, numbers don't lie. But numbers also can tell you very little. And so this hoarding of data that if you think back, just look at your own computer, right? Think about what's on your company servers. Things that are probably decades old, that haven't been used, haven't been touched. And as a consumer, as soon as that's hacked, as soon as that's accessed, that's my historical information that you were never really using in the first place. Actually, a big retailer, Walmart,
yes,
which you're familiar with, they only actively use the last 4 weeks of customer data, right, every month. They look at that data, they use that data, and that's the only data they hold. So it's a question of what data do you actually need? You probably don't need a lot of data, and you actually probably need more timely data if you're talking about that type of information. So you're going to gather a lot of insight by engaging with customers directly, God forbid, but if you engage with them directly, you can gather a lot more with less effort than trying to just kind of amass this large amount of information that makes you feel comfortable. It's a security blanket, right? Look at all the data I have. But how much of that data is actually digested, translated, and actually solves a business question, right? 9 times out of 10, there's no business question it's solving. It just exists. It just is embodied somewhere in the organization. So organizations need to step back and think about what they actually need, because that will really address this whole consumer data question.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because in my work with organisations, even the question of what data do you actually have and what data do you own, you often get a quizzical look because they don't quite know, and you ask the question, who are your customers?
Oh.
And you get a very generic response around it, and you sort of think, actually, really? So it's interesting. You go back to some of the first principles and fundamentals of who is it, what do you need it for, and to your point, Andrew, what business question does it solve? But one of the things I really enjoyed about your book, and indeed your work more generally, is you obviously go deep into the human behavioural aspects that businesses need to understand, right? You're making a decision about whether to buy, transact, engage, share with organisations, and we do that on the basis of emotions, how we think, how we feel, and we also have biases as well. I want to hear more about that, and I was particularly struck with one of the quotes, brilliant quotes that you have on the book from Rory Sutherland, no less, where he talks about the distinctions and paradoxes in human behaviour which most businesses overlook to their cost. In that field of human behaviour, when it comes to customers, what are they, and what should they be focusing on in terms of trying to understand them, harness them, or potentially mitigate them?
Yeah. Isn't Rory just the Shakespeare of our time, right? With his eloquence and how he writes and speaks. It's sometimes a bull in a china shop, but always entertaining. The thing about emotion and logic is that businesses often believe that consumers or customers make decisions based on logic, right? We pump out so much data, let's say, about a product. We got product specifications, information, details, and comparison tools, and all these things to help customers make better decisions. But more times than not, actually, emotion really kind of takes the front seat, right? It takes the driver's role. And there's a wonderful quote in the book that I won't reveal about that, about elephants in that regard. But the difference is that because we're assuming everyone is working on logic alone, that there's no cognitive biases or inherent noise that's influencing their decision, and that it's linear, organizations then put out materials and tools and communications that are based on that premise. However, we all know that everyone has different contexts that they're dealing with when they're making a decision. So it can be something as simple as, let's say you're buying a TV, and a TV manufacturer is going to say, okay, here's all the comparisons, here's all the information, et cetera, et cetera. But in context, maybe there's a big match that's coming up and your TV just spontaneously broke and there's no way it's going to be fixed. And you're going to the store and you're going to buy the TV that's readily available in your price range, right? All the comparison features and all those, bits and baubles that organization produced are null and void. So organizations actually need to step back and think about two things. One is the context in which customers make decisions, which is a big kind of heart of the book, and how to address that. And then also these cognitive biases, which really is the essence of behavioral economics or behavioral science, if you will. And a lot of companies don't realize how much those influence customers' perceptions and behaviors. But more importantly, those biases actually influence the organization itself. So if you think as a company you're immune to those biases and it only applies to customers, well, your people too. And so you're going to have these little heuristics that change your perception about things.
Fascinating. I want to dive. Well, you're not diving up. I want to move up a level again, because you refer in one aspect of your work between the relationship between strategy, culture, and the customer relationship. And you particularly challenge how companies articulate their, if you like, their mission. Tell me a bit more about how that relationship works, because it all sounds very intuitive. we are more customer centric. We have a strategy that reflects the customer's needs, and our focus and how we win reflects that. And we have a culture which is about how work gets done, that is all about customers. It all sounds like common sense, but you don't often see it in many organizations, particularly the traditional ones. But those who get it well, how do they manage and optimize that relationship between strategy, culture, and the customer relationship?
Well, it's interesting because as you talk about customer mission statements and customer centricity, as we all know, we've all experienced somewhere along the line that usually that's window dressing. It's something that is for comfort alone and not for function, if you will. So when you're looking at culture, strategy, and the customer relationship, these things are highly intertwined, right? You have to have a strategy, a mentality, and a behavior that all fit together. So a good example is if you want a culture that's, let's say, very customer-centric, hands-on, and look for new ideas, but you are strategically, you're very change-resistant, risk-averse, right? These things aren't going to work together. So you can say one thing and you'll do another. And everyone's been in an environment where that has occurred. So it has to be thought of as a triumvirate, right? So strategy, culture, and customers all have to be built together as an ecosystem, and each have to be supporting each other because it has to be kind of baked in to every key aspect of the organization's operations.
Absolutely. And getting more practical, because I always like in my podcast discussions to get to tips and suggestions and methods that people can actually use. It's not just concepts. One of the things I really liked was you had a customer strategy scorecard, which I thought was really cool and something I could use immediately. Tell us more about it and how people should use it.
Yeah, so the one thing I felt was critical in this book was to say, okay, you have some concepts, you have some specific tools and approaches to changing your mindset, to changing the organization's mindset about how to think about customer centricity, as well as how to engage customers more effectively. But then it always comes back down to, but we're here to make money. Right? We need to understand what's working and what's not working. So the customer strategy scorecard was really meant to be a framework that every company can customize based on their unique circumstances. And the intent is that it's focused on measuring initiatives based on the customer's driver or behavior. So you can not just have an idea of what's actually causing the output, right, or the result, but also have a connection between the measure and what's influencing it. So we might say, hey, let's do a campaign, let's send something out, and we want this specific goal, right? Time passes, and did we meet that goal or did we not meet that goal? Okay. The question really is, why did you not meet that goal or meet it? Are we halfway? Are we a third of the way? And what is going on? What can we change and influence that might either make that go higher or lower? So if you don't have that knowledge and you're not using that as part of your measurement, then you're just picking goals, you're picking numbers, and people will kind of fudge their way to success. And that doesn't really educate the organization on how to learn and how to understand what customers want and then respond to that.
I really like that. That's a great taster. Of course, listeners, you'll have to buy the book to get more of a flavour of it and how to use it. But I love that as a taster. But I want to change tack now, because at the beginning of our conversation, I referred to your organisation, Pragmatic, and how you describe it. And I'm fascinated. I've been doing some research and thinking about how consultancy is being, the whole consultancy industry is being disrupted, or not, as the case may be. And I'm going to quote something from your brilliant website, which really grabbed my attention, where you said, most consulting is a massive sea of fluffy bullshit. What we do actually matters. I love that. Love that. Of course, as a former consultant, I'm still a consultant. I don't know what you're talking about, but go on. What do consultants actually get wrong? And that's the first question. And the second question would be, if they are getting it wrong, why is it the case that overall, actually the big players are not being disrupted? The big players are still the big players. But first off, what are they getting wrong?
I wish as a consultant, that there was another word we could use instead of consultant. I think it has such a sketchy connotation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. It has a very bad brand image. Even for those consultants that are wonderful and successful and helpful, it still has this image of, we're here to just tell you things and take money. And I think we have to, as an industry, just try to change that. And maybe changing that word might help. But it's important to understand that I think consultants historically, and maybe this was back in kind of the 80s, maybe early 90s era, where it was, we make money based on research and data, right? You have these business questions, we get a bunch of information, we come back and we give you this big binder of information. And we also draw these very generic but best practice based conclusions for you, right? That could be anything you learned in MBA school, right? Usually it's that, or some custom grid or chart or flavor that we created that's proprietary to us. And it's really no different than anything else. It's just the jumbled of words are mixed around and maybe different words are used. The problem is that that's not useful, right? The problem is customers, they don't, especially business customers, they have problems they don't fully understand. They don't totally understand what solution they need. And I think of it almost like going to the doctor, right? So if you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I have some vague symptoms, and the doctor pulls out his book, just like WebMD, and he goes, oh, that's this. Here's your pills or your prescription. Go have a good day. That's not an effective solution for that patient, right? A good physician is going to ask more questions. Good physician is going to understand that patient's context. Yes. They're going to understand the environment they live in. They're going to understand their history. And they're going to say, all right, there might be a solution to your problem that maybe isn't pills. Maybe it's physical therapy. Maybe it's counseling. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's just behavior change. And really tailor a solution to that patient's context. And consultants have just really gone on autopilot and said, we're just going to spit this out. That's what they need to do. Go do it. When you have to know that, just like a patient, people need help in changing their behavior, and businesses need help in changing their behaviors. And so being a lot more immersed, not applying a prescription, I think is what consultants need to be doing. That actually provides help and helping the organization learn.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I would say the best consultants are the ones that not only dig deep, personalize, rather than go on autopilot, but they also have a deeper belief that the answer is inside the minds and hearts of the organization, as opposed to saying we know better. Yes, they provide an insight and experience and so on, but a belief is more of a coaching mindset in many ways than a sort of expert mindset. Yet the big consultancies are still strong. Perhaps their day will come. But let's move on to you. As I always ask even more of you. I always ask in my podcast a bit about the individual, as well as the author, speaker, consultant, better word for that, coach, advisor. How, when you think about your own career and your own life, Andrea, and all the success you have, how do you think about your impact? How do you measure your impact?
That's a good question. And I think it goes back to when we talked about measurements and metrics a little bit, that there's things that are very hard to measure, right? And that would be one of those things that's incredibly hard to measure. Can you put a number on it? Can you put some type of statistic on it? Can you measure it in a way that's, black and white? And I'd argue, just like love, how do you measure how much you love someone, right? How can you put that into tangible terms? And I don't believe you can, right? It's much more emotionally driven than logic driven, right? So I would say that, how I measure my impact, my satisfaction in what I do is that I try to just simply live a philosophy of that I did what I could with the time I had. It made me happy. It made me proud. It made me feel accomplished. And it made me feel like I actually contributed to the success of others. And can I measure how well or poorly I'm doing at that? Maybe on a day-to-day basis, maybe, at certain points in time, but I think it's much more a philosophical, emotionally driven measurement than actually a numbers driven one.
I like that. And I appreciate that. And last question then, when you think about your best days, we think, I've been absolutely knocking it out of the park. I've been doing fantastic work. What are the habits or practices that you use to enable that?
It might sound kind of like the antithesis of what you should do, but what I do often is stop. I stop daily. And I mean by stepping away, doing nothing, looking at something else, doing something else. I try to mix up how I exercise my brain with different things on a daily basis. So if I'm writing something, I'm getting stuck, I'm getting frustrated, I'll stop and say, okay, maybe I need to physically move around. Everybody does that, right? This is an old adage. But what I will do is say, what can I do to use a different part of my brain and give this part a break? And so I'll do something physical, right? A physical labor job, cleaning something, mowing the lawn, going and doing something that takes a different aspect of my brain and gives the other side a break. Just kind of, I think it's almost like exercising a muscle, right? If you just did curls with your right arm every day and that's all you did, you're going to look like Popeye very quickly. But having a balanced workout, right? A balanced workout with all of your body, you're going to be a lot more proportional. So I try to do that with my mind as well and not force it. If I'm not feeling the flow of something, stop, walk away, do something else. And you'll get that moment that it dawns on you, something sparks, something else random sparks an idea. And that's when you attack it. You don't try to fit a round peg in a square hole.
Yeah, I love that. That's really helpful. I'll try more of it tomorrow. Wonderful. Andrew, that's a wonderful conversation. I love your candor. You're clearly very insightful. I love your directness. You have a healthy dose of humor as well. And I think your take on customers is refreshingly distinctive. And I wholeheartedly recommend people reading your book and following you. Where can they find out more about you and your work?
Well, of course, they can go to our company site. That's Pragmatic, PRAGMADIK.com. That's the phonetic spelling of Pragmatic. Or they can look me up. I have a speaker website. I do a lot of speaking, both domestically and internationally. That's just my full name, Andrea Belk Olson, BELKOLSON.com. LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, kind of all the grams, if you will.
And having done my research and homework, as I said, the language you use really grabs attention. It's refreshing. It's not that boring corporate sort of BS that you hear. It's really fresh and distinctive, and it hits you in the face. So I give you massive credit for that in a sea of, of sort of blandness often. So well done for that. So thank you, Andrea. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. If you've enjoyed the conversation, do subscribe to the YouTube channel and to my podcast to get alerted to more episodes. And of course, if you feel so inclined, do give me a wonderful rating. And please do check out the interviews in the rest of the series. Thank you ever so much. And thank you, Andrea.